Anaya, I wanted to tell you about the day. This was a very magical day for me and a magical day for you too. It was the day of your birth, but it's also the day that I became a mom. And so I consider that one of the most amazing journeys of my entire life. So I started to have labor pains about 39 weeks. 39 weeks into the pregnancy. You were a week early. And so I started to have contractions on a Tuesday afternoon. Me and your father were shopping and we were getting ready for you. We were buying things, getting your nursery ready, making sure that everything was just perfect for you. And I started to feel what felt like very light contractions in my stomach. And I told your dad, I said, I feel something. I think she's getting ready to come. You're my first baby and the first time I've ever gone through this. But something told me that this wasn't something to ignore, that this was you getting ready to come. And you know what your dad said to me? He said, no, she's not coming. It's a week early. So after explaining to him that it doesn't quite work that way, we went home and just started to wrap our minds around the fact that my body was getting ready to birth the baby. So a few hours later, we started to call the midwife because we wanted to have you at home we want to have you at home for a water birth because I feel like that's how babies should be born. If there are no complications, we wanted it to be intimate. We wanted it to feel like home. We wanted to welcome you. And so we didn't really want to do it in the hospital with all the loud noise and lights. And we wanted it to feel intimate. So we planned this beautiful home water birth. And I was going to have you in the tub. So we called the midwife and they started to come over. And by this time it was Wednesday morning. And the contractions had gotten a little bit more intense, but I was handling them. I was doing so well. Your dad was a great coach. He was coaching me on. I was on the yoga ball. I was on my yoga mat. I was doing my breathing. Because, you know, it feels like pain when you have the contractions. But when you're focused and when I was breathing the way that I needed to, when I was really connected to my body, it felt like my body was expanding. And that's really what it is. Sometimes we confuse pain, we confuse change with pain. When really sometimes change is just transformation. And it's the process of expanding that we have to go through in order to do more and become more. And I was becoming a mom. And so the contractions were getting a little bit more intense and I was staying focused. And it started to go into the evening. And Tunde wasn't there yet. Grandma was on her way. But you were early, so we weren't quite prepared. So we were getting ready and I was staying focused. And right around Wednesday evening, the midwife checked me and I was at 6 centimeters dilated. Now I got to 6 very quickly, but after 6, it just, you know, for hours at a time, it was still 6. The midwife would check me again, it was still 6 centimeters. And I started to become afraid. I was scared because I'd never done this before and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I could do it. It was such a new experience and my body was starting to expand even more and it became more and more difficult for me to stay focused. And I don't know how else to describe it except for I was scared. I remember in my mind thinking, can I do this? How can I do this? And in my mind, I was thinking of all the books that I read and all the videos, just like this one, of women telling the stories of their birth, of their baby's birth. And in my mind, I was thinking, of course you can do this. Of course you can do this. But I couldn't embody the belief that I could. I couldn't get it from just being in my mind of knowing that technically my body could do this miraculous thing. I needed to feel it. I needed to feel the miraculousness, and it was so hard for me to get it from just knowing it intellectually and theoretically to really bringing it into my body and embodying the spirit of belief. And so I was still at 6 centimeters, and we went into the night, and the contractions got more and more painful, and your dad was so supportive. He was really coaching me on, and by the morning time, my water had broken. I was exhausted and I was still at 6 centimeters. So the midwife suggested that we go to the hospital. And I was devastated because I had planned this beautiful water birth, and I just knew that that's how you wanted to come into the world, and that was how I planned it. And, you know, up until that point, I pretty much planned everything in my life. We plan, you know, we plan our lives, we plan our careers, we plan buying a home and getting married, and I think as women we start to believe that we can plan birth, that it will go exactly the way we planned it out, and it just didn't go that way. So I was devastated, and your dad agreed with the midwife, and so I trusted your daddy very much in that moment. So we went on to the hospital, and they were generous, they were kind. They put us with the midwife, and she was kind. She plopped down on the hospital bed, and she looked me and your dad in the eyes, and she said, how do you want this birth to go? What do you need from me? What do you need? And I love that. I felt like she made a connection to us, so I felt safe. They induced me with Pitocin, which was another disappointment because I wanted to have you completely natural. And so they induced me, and with your dad's help, I managed to not get the epidural, which I was very proud of myself. But those contractions, once I got the Pitocin, they got so painful. And I didn't think I could do it. I was just like, oh my God, I need drugs. But your dad prayed with me, and we kept my mind focused. And even though it was really painful, we worked our way through it. And by about 5:30, Tunde got there. And by about 6 o'clock, you were coming. I felt you start to kind of drop down, and I knew you were coming. And so I got in the hospital bed, and the nurses were holding my legs, and your dad was looking me in the eyes, and I started to push. And you know, let me rephrase that. I didn't start to push. You started to come down. And so I started to try to release my body and release my mind, because this was something that was happening. I wasn't making it happen. It was something that my body was doing. And so it was you, it was God, it was my body, all working together as a team. And I just had to kind of pull myself out of it and allow nature to take place through me, and allow the rhythm of life being born to happen through me. And so that was an amazing experience, because I feel like that's how life is, you know? We start to think that we're the ones in control, when in all actuality we're not. And sometimes we have to surrender to nature, we have to surrender to natural law, we have to surrender to God's will, and that's what I had to do in that moment. And let me tell you, that is painful. Easier said than done, especially when you're used to being in control like I was. And so I started to push and started to allow you to come through, and I remember it got so intense at one point. I was thinking, I can't do this, I'm giving up, she's just not going to come, I'll just be pregnant for the rest of my life, and that is okay. And the nurses and your daddy looked me in the eyes, and he said, one more time, just push one more time for me. So exhausted and feeling like I couldn't do it, I pushed one more time, and I didn't know that you'd come out. I pushed, and then I just kind of laid down like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, we're done. And I heard your voice, and I heard you, and then I saw you. And up until that moment, I have to say that's the most precious moment of my life, because we made eye contact immediately, and you looked at me and I looked at you, and I thought, there was a baby in there. I just had a baby. And everything in me was exhausted, but I tell you, even though my body and mind were exhausted, it was the most spiritual experience of my whole life. As I looked in your eyes, and I was just amazed. It was beautiful. And so they put me in the wheelchair and wheeled me to my room, and it was the happiest moment of my life, even though I was incredibly exhausted. And yeah. So that's the story of your birth. I hope that that tells you a little bit about yourself, and I know I learned so much about myself in that process. And someone new was born. You were born, but I was born too. It was a rebirth for me, and I became more and more of who I was. And being your mom over these last few months, I'm becoming more and more of who I am. And so as you came through me, life came and I became new. I love you, Anaya. Thank you. Thank you for choosing me to be your mom.